In this video, I'm going to cover a topic that causes a decent amount of confusion to new users of Fulcro. On the surface, it looks kind of complicated, and it's really not that bad. So union queries. So I've already typed out some code here to avoid you having to watch me type it all out to kind of demonstrate the first use of unions. So nothing here should be unfamiliar to you. I've got a defse for an image or comment component. The props I'm destructuring are an ID, a kind, a URL, and text, depending on which kind it is. The query, I'm asking for a DB ID, what kind of thing it is, comment, text, and image URL. In other words, I'm mixing two concerns in one component. I'm asking for comment stuff and images stuff all in the same component. I'm giving it an ident, and of course I can't give it a clear table name. And then I'm giving it an initial state where, depending on if you supply a URL or text, it sets the kind for you. Right, so I'm sort of doing just a mishmash here. And then I'm making an li and a case statement that checks the kind and renders the right thing. Make a root. Root posts joins into image or comment. Root post is destructured. Initial state, I throw 3 image or comments into the root posts with IDs 1, 2, and 3. And I guess I should have a URL here since that's supposed to be an image. And then I just map over UI image or comment with a key function of dbid. So reload that, and you can see normalizes, and it renders what I expect to be rendered. So imagine this is a stream like on Facebook or something where it could be a comment, it could be an image, it could be a video, a bunch of different things could end up in the stream, and you really want to multiplex over them. So the problem with what we know so far in terms of the regular plain queries is we end up having to write something that looks like this or worse. We might decide to split image out to a component, comment out to a component, but then there's no easy way to make the stream because we would have to query for those separately. They'd be in separate tables. We could try jamming them in the same table, but then there's no query syntax to cleanly get that back out except to just query for everything. So this is one option, and I have seen cases where this particular option is an okay option to kind of bag things up together, and that usually comes in most handy when the things are very closely related. So in the case I know in particular was different builds were in app state, and the builds had to do with, they had different targets. So there was some variation that was a minor variation, but they were all really builds. But some builds had a browser information, some build had node information, that sort of thing. And so maybe bagging these all up into one thing makes sense. In this particular example, I really don't think it makes sense. I'm probably going to load images from a different database table, comments from a different database table, and then some piece of logic is going to mix those together into a list, and I'd like everything to work well with that. So even though I can make this work, I can munge it together, it's not very clean, and it's certainly not how I'm going to end up wanting to load it from the server. I'm not going to want to query for image or comment and have that. I mean, I could. It's possible. But unions are meant to address this exact circumstance. The idea is I'd like to run the query, and I'd like the query to be accurate for the kind of thing that's actually found in the database. And so this is the key sticky point that confuses people, is the query is determined at runtime. The query is no longer this static thing, right? So when I look at this query and it's a vector of things, that's exactly what it's going to go looking for in the database, is these 4 things in the query. With a union query, it's going to be a little different. So let me pop you up here to some stuff I've also typed out up here, where I've split out these 2 concerns into separate components. So I'm going to leave image or comment here just so people can look at it online and tinker with the files. But now I'm going to move into using the image or comment separately. So images, I'm going to need a kind. If I'm going to use a union query, the kind is exactly what I'm going to need to switch the query out on. So I still need something in the database that can let me figure out what I have. Same thing when I go to render it. I need some way of figuring it out. Now, you don't have to have a literal property. Maybe you can derive it just by looking. Does it have an image URL or does it have comment text? If that's the case, then I can just drop item kind. In fact, why not? Let's just do that. So I've got a DB ID. So now I have a very clean query. I've not got anything extra. I can make my initial state much more clean. I'm going to go ahead and touch up what I had here before. So these things are distinguishable. I can get rid of the extra ID cruft on that one. So now I have two different things that have two different queries and are going in two different tables. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, I'm going to write a function for determining the ident based on a real thing in state. So I'm either going to have, right, so the possible things in state, I'm either going to have dbid 1 image URL something, or I'm going to have a dbid and a comment text. These go in one table, and these obviously go in the other. I'm not going to type that out. You get the idea. So I'm going to define a function that can give me the correct ident based on the data. So my normalization can work, and you'll see where this goes in a minute. But you can see that the auto normalization uses your ident function to figure out where to put data. So if I go and query something, and it could be an image or a comment, and I need to normalize that, Fulcro needs to be able to figure that out. And so I need to make my ident function, so I'm going to make this a stream item ident based on props. So I can't base this on an ID, I actually need props. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the props contain image/URL, then my ident is going to be images by ID, and here let's do a, and I always do that backwards. That's not actually helping me with what I wanted to do, so let's just leave it with if. Then this is going to be, oh, let's just do it here. This is really what I want. So those are the things that I might find in the object. A dbid I should always find. I could find an image URL. I could find comment text. So if I found a URL, then it's images by ID at ID. Otherwise, it must be a comment at that ID. Right? So now I've decided how to make an ident based on real data that I might see in properties. Okay, so that's step one. So now down here, instead of using the template form of ident and defsc, I can use a function form, and ident closes over props, so now I can call stream item ident on props, and that'll give me the correct ident for an image. And here the assumption is this ident will only get called if it's really an image, and we're gonna see how that's going to work out here in a minute. I'm just kind of throwing these together. So in comment we have the same thing. If we were to be handed the props for a comment, that's the ident that we would generate. Now it is important that you put idents on these classes. It's not necessary to get the initial render right, but it is necessary for normalization of an incoming query, and it's also useful internally, or required internally for Fulcro, for targeted refresh. So make sure you put these idents on here. Okay, so I've got my initial state, I've got my query. everything's looking pretty clean. Now technically I could, since this ident's only going to be called if it really is a comment, I could have hand coded comment by ID with the ID here, but just to make it consistent in case I decide to edit something about how these, maybe the table name, I don't have to go change it in a bunch of places. I'm just drawing it up. Okay, so this is the next piece. So now instead of image or comment as the name here, I'm going to say it's a stream item. This is going to be my new thing, and this is going to be a union. So here's where the union query comes in. And so here what I'm going to get is the actual props. So really, oh, I don't have kind here, which makes it a little more difficult on the query. So let me show you the query first. So the query is a map instead of a vector, and you have to use the lambda form to do unions in defsc, because defsc tries to error check vector queries. So, and what we're going to say here is we're just going to use, we're basically giving it what queries we might want to run at this point in the query, depending on what data we've currently found while running the query. So let me say that again. This is a map of what queries could be run based on what is found in the database. So if I find a comment, right, which is what the ident will look like. It'll have comments by ID as its first element. If I find a comment in the database, then I want to run the comment query. If I find an image in the database at the location I'm at, then I want to use images query to continue walking. And this works recursively. So if comment had further recursive things, it's fine. If image had further different recursive things, it's all good. So this is our switch back and forth. And you will see how this comes together. And the ident, again, we need the lambda form for this one. We're going to use our stream item ident on props. Finished coding this, so I'm going to need to change this. And I'm going to need a let here because I'm going to need to figure out what kind of thing I ended up with. So I've told it the ident, I've told it the query. The union itself is going to have initial state, but it's going to have to be a list of things. I think I'm going to initialize this one level higher up. I'm going to let root initialize this. So I'm going to pull that out for the moment. Because otherwise I have to pass a bunch of parameters through just to show it to you. Normally it would be loaded from the server. So I'm going to make the decision here on what kind of thing I found by this contains check, which I should probably wrap in a function, but so that'll set my kind to image or comment. And now I can actually render a UI image on props or a UI comment on props. So I'm getting two things here. I'm getting the ability to run an exact query, and then I'm getting the ability to run the exact renderer I want. And so I can, I renamed this. I meant to keep that around. Oh well, you've got it in the video form. So now posts is a stream item union. And if I get this right, I'll be very happy. And I can say I've got a comment and a comment and an image. So now things have kind of cleaned up nicely there. And so now I still do need a factory for the union. So the one of the things to note here is that the stream item union, the thing that sits in the middle, its job is pretty much strictly to make this query decision and then proxy off the rendering to one of these children. It can include its own rendering. You see I've got the DOM li still in here, and that's fine. It can augment the rendering, render whatever it wants to render, but for consistent, let's see, it really should render the right thing. All right, now if I'm lucky and I've coded that all correctly, that will still work, and it does. Good. So, it didn't work perfectly though. We ended up with a strange extra entry. Not sure why that happened, and I don't want to analyze it right at the moment, but and it could have just been some transient thing where the compiler hadn't finished. But let me talk you through what's going on here. In my initial state, I put root posts. I put 3 things in there, and that was in a tree. When it went to normalize it, these 3 things, the comment, and the image, were literally in here as maps, because initial state had them in there as a vector of maps. That's what get initial state's going to give me back. It's going to give me back those, it's going to give me back the maps from the things I called. So I called comments, get initial state with a map. So this was initially a tree. When it went to normalize, what it did was it looked at the query, saw that this level of the query was a union, used the ident function. Yeah, used the ident function to figure out what the correct ident was, and notice the idents are changing back and forth, and picked those pieces up and normalized it. When it got the ident, it was able to pick the first element of the ident out and use that to figure out which query to use to continue walking the chain. So this is why it seems confusing, and it probably is confusing you if this is your first look at it, is dynamically these things are being used as it walks the query or the tree of data to figure out what to do next. So when we go to render the UI, right, we start at root. Root runs this query which asks for root posts. It goes and looks at root posts and it pulls these idents. The internals of Fulcro now look at this this ident. They see that this query is a union query. They take the first element out of the ident. That looks up this query. This query is used to query for comments by ID 1. So we get the DB ID and comment text. If we use the wrong query, we wouldn't get the correct data. So this has a performance advantage in that if you made the big bag of things, the query engine would be having to ask, look and analyze, hey, all right, do you have this, do you have that, do you have the other thing? And here it's kind of pared down. Same thing on the server side loads. You don't want to send a big query to the server that it has to parse where a lot of the crap is just not going to be there because it's the wrong kind of thing. So this gets you back to a really nice data-driven story for heterogeneous lists of things. I'm going to reload one more time. This nil is just because I'm doing something funky in my normalization. I'll debug that separately. Okay, so the other use for this, besides heterogeneous lists, which is a very good use for this, and there's some demos in the demos that show some, like a heterogeneous editor where you can walk down and click on the right thing and then figure out what it is and show it in a correct kind of editor, right? So unions are handy here. And by the way, defrouter, which maybe you've seen or thought about, defrouter is a way of defining a UI concern that can switch between different parts of your UI. And you don't have to use defrouter, but defrouter creates a union for you. It basically takes the coding pain out of it so that you get it right. It is a little difficult to get all these things to align, to get the stars to align perfectly. Like I said, this one where I'm getting all nils out of this list, I'm not sure exactly off the top of my head why that's happening. Maybe one of you has already noticed why that might be. But they're a little finicky because there's numerous new moving parts, and it's not just something you statically analyze by looking at the components. You have to actually know what data you're dealing with as you work through these. So the other thing that they're used for, like I said, is defrouter. which is a 2-1 relationship on a union. So I can use these same exact things to show you what that looks like. So instead of root post being a too many, let's say we point it at 1. So I just raised that initial state up, image of 1. But now root post is just root post. So let me modify that around. So there is a thing that's there that I've currently set to an image. Right? And so now if I reload to get a reinitialization of state, let's see now, what did I put in? I put it in image, but for some reason it normalized to a comment. So this probably has to do with what was causing me my problem a moment ago. Get query, stream item union. I guess I'm stuck looking at it. Ah, all right, I see. No. Oh, that's a problem. There we go. All right, still don't know why I'm getting my null entry into my comments table, but that was just a rendering problem there. Okay. So I've put an image in there, and just for giggles, what I can do, and this is a common thing you might want to play with as a way of playing with initial state, is you could also add some just fake key on your root. And this is just, again, for this kind of tinkering with things, where I can say I've got some query for that, and what I'm going to do is in initial state, I'm just going to make that a too many, similar to what we had just a moment ago, or maybe I've got a comment at ID 3 and maybe another comment at ID 8. Initializing those right. Yep, ID text. And okay, so the whole reason I'm doing that is just to get some extra ones in state. I'm not going to actually render those. So let me reload here. And so you can see it's still got the same view, and then my fake keys got these guys, and I've got these normalized in where I've got some extra comments or images. So this is the basic pattern for UI routing, where I want to switch among things that have different kinds. And again, the first element of the ident needs to be the kind of thing, because that's what selects the query. So if I were to write a simple mutation, I don't know, route to, I'm going to be silly, 8. Params I don't care about. Action, I need the state. Swap bang on state, assoc root post with the stream item ident. Well, I know what it's going to be, so I'm just going to, 8 is going to be a comment. 8. So that's all I'm going to do is swap out that so I'm just going to throw a button. So I'm literally just going to make a silly thing like that. So I'm just going to let that button swap out that ident, and you see it changes the renderer. So this is the essential nature of, and then let's just throw another one in here. If we want to go back to image 2, right, and suddenly I've got kind of tabs. So the comment is 8, the image is 2. I think I've done that right. Route to image, route to comment. So here's your tab support. And basically defrouter will make one of these for you based on you just writing the individual pieces. So you could write an image or a comment, plug it into defrouter, and it'll write this intermediate code, the union, and an actual component one above it to keep track of which way you'd like to route. So this this root post key here, right, where it's currently pointing. So defrouter has a current route that points to the current thing, and then a union that can do the appropriate thing. And that's really important actually for query efficiency. So the query, because this is an alternation, when you're running a UI that's rather large and has many screens, you really want to use a union query. This is really the main use for it. You want to use a union query so that you only query for the stuff that's on the screen. If you query for every frame for everything you might display on the screen ever, your application is going to be really slow. So look into defrouter, but this is the basic of union queries, and I hope you understand it better now.